My sister sold her house to fund a dream vacation, and now my parents want her family to move into my place. I've lived here for the past decade, gradually paying it off, and now it's finally mine. It's not extravagant, just a modest 3-bedroom home, but it's mine. You know that feeling when you've worked hard for something and you can finally sit back and think, yeah, I did that? That's where I'm at. It's not decorated fancy, nor does it have a big backyard, but it's a good, quiet, comfortable spot. And most importantly, it's my space. It's where I can relax without any stress. Then there's my sister Jenny. She's 29, married to Alex, who's 31. They're the type of people who talk a lot about how everyone else is wasting their lives with boring 9-to-5 jobs while they're living the best life. They've always been like that ever since they got together, always planning some grand escape from the daily grind. Honestly, I never thought they'd actually go through with it. Everyone talks about quitting their jobs and traveling the world, but it's just a phase, right? A dream you let go of once you realize you need to pay bills. But Jenny and Alex aren't like that. They sold their house, the one where their 2 kids, Emma and Lucas, had grown up, and decided to travel for a year. Yes, they sold everything for a dream vacation. They thought the market was booming and that they'd make a ton off the sale, so they planned to live off the money, doing odd jobs here and there, and traveling for a year. I watched it all from my small house and thought, good for them, but also, this is a terrible idea. They've got 2 kids. Emma's 7, Lucas is 5, and traveling with kids isn't the same as backpacking around Europe on a whim. It requires careful planning, but they brushed that off, saying they'd figure it out as they went. I figured, okay, whatever, it's their life. A couple of months later, I'm relaxing in my house, probably watching TV, when I get a call from Jenny. I hadn't heard much from her since they left, just the occasional post on Instagram showing them enjoying amazing food in random places. So I figured this call would be her bragging about their travels. But as soon as I answered, I could tell something was wrong. Jenny was stressed, really stressed, and started telling me how things didn't go as planned. Apparently, they burned through their money much faster than expected. Within 2 months, they were almost broke. Turns out, traveling the world isn't cheap. Who knew, right? They stayed in nice places, ate out at restaurants, and lived like they had unlimited money. But when you're not working and still spending, it doesn't last long, especially with 2 kids. Hostels and cheap Airbnbs are fun until you've got tired, hungry kids who need a stable place to stay every night. Now they're stuck. They can't keep traveling because they've run out of money, but they don't want to settle down and buy another house. So they ask if they can move in with me. Yep, Jenny, Alex, and their 2 kids, all moving into my 3-bedroom house. Forget 10 months, and here's the catch. They want to stay rent-free. They didn't even offer to contribute, just asked if they could live with me for almost a year while they figure things out. At first, I didn't know how to respond. It's my sister, and I care about her, but this is my home, my space. I didn't work hard for 10 years just to let 4 extra people come in and take over. Plus, I've got a routine. I like my peace and quiet. I can't even imagine what my house would be like with 2 small kids running around and all the mess. So I told her, look, Jenny, I love you, but this isn't going to work. The house is too small, and I don't want that kind of disruption. I even offered to help them find a rental nearby, or give them some money for a couple of months to help them get back on their feet. But that wasn't enough. Jenny got angry right away. She called me selfish, saying I didn't care about family and that I was jealous of their adventurous lifestyle. Jealous? Really? Now I was getting angry too. It's not about jealousy or not caring about family, it's about boundaries. I don't owe them a place to live just because they made a bad decision and didn't plan ahead. I get that life doesn't always go as planned, but they sold their house without a backup plan, and now they want to dump the consequences on me. And it gets better. After Jenny blew up at me, she got our parents involved. My parents live in a tiny apartment, so they can't take in Jenny's family. But instead of seeing my side, they started pushing me to let them move in. My mom went on about how family helps family and how I should be more understanding of Jenny and Alex's situation. She told me I didn't understand the value of experiences and that I should be supportive. Supportive? I offered support. I offered to help them find a place to rent or pitch in some money for a few months, but that wasn't enough. They wanted free rent, my house, my space for almost a year. And the worst part, they weren't even planning to settle down. They were still talking about taking trips if they found cheap deals. So basically, they want to live in my house, rent-free, while still being free-spirited travelers whenever they feel like it. How does that make sense? Now, I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to deal with the fallout. Jenny's not talking to me, my parents are mad at me, and even some of our mutual friends think I'm being too harsh. But I don't think I'm in the wrong. It's not like I'm kicking them when they're down. I offered help in other ways. I just don't want them living in my house, rent-free for 10 months. After that first awkward phone call with Jenny, I figured things were going to get weird, but I wasn't ready for how messy it was about to get. I thought maybe I could just stand my ground and tell her no, and that would be the end of it. But nope! Jenny and Alex showed up at my house in person about a week later without giving me a heads up, which already set me on edge. I was just doing my usual Saturday morning thing, enjoying the quiet, when the doorbell rang. I opened it, and there stood Jenny with Alex and the kids. They looked at me like I was about to save the day. I knew what they were going to ask, but I didn't expect them to show up like this. Jenny started off with small talk, asking how I was doing, how work was going, and I could feel the tension in the air. I knew they weren't just here to chat. It was that moment where someone is clearly buttering you up for something big. And I'm standing there trying to stay polite, but bracing myself for what's coming. After a long silence, Alex cleared his throat and said, "So, Brian, we've been thinking about what you said on the phone." And Jenny took over. She said, "We know you didn't think it'd work for us to live here, but we really believe we can make it work. It's just 10 months. We won't be any trouble. The kids are good, and we'll keep everything clean." I just stood there for a moment, unsure of how to respond. There's no way 2 kids will stay out of my way in a house this small. And the idea that they'll magically not disrupt my life, it's just not happening. I tried to stay calm and asked, "What's the plan? What happens after 10 months? Are you going to buy another house? What about work?" Jenny and Alex exchanged a look like they hadn't thought that part through. Then Jenny said, "We're still figuring that out. We might go back to traveling if things work out. We've been looking for cheap flights, and there's a chance we could get back on the road by the end of the year. We just need a place to regroup." I couldn't believe it. They want to stay with me for 10 months and are still talking about taking more trips? Really? You're broke? You've got 2 kids? And your big plan is to keep living this fantasy life where you float around from place to place? I didn't even know what to say. There's no logic in that. I tried to stay polite and told them, "I understand you're in a tough spot, but I'm really not comfortable with this. It's not that I don't want to help, but my house isn't set up for that. I have my own routine, and I don't think having you all here for 10 months would work. The house is too small, and there's just not enough space." Jenny's face changed instantly, from hopeful to angry. She crossed her arms and said, "Are you serious? We're family, Brian. Family helps each other out. You've got all this space, and it's just you. What's the big deal?" I started getting frustrated. I understand they're stressed, but it feels like they think they're entitled to my space just because we're family. I tried to stay calm and explain, "It's not just about space, Jenny. It's about my life, too. I worked hard for this house, and I need my peace and quiet. I'm happy to help in other ways, but having you all live here for almost a year just isn't going to work." Alex finally jumped in, sensing the tension, and said, "Maybe we can work something out. What if we helped around the house, did chores, cooked meals, and we'll be out during the day? You won't even notice we're here." But of course, I'd notice 4 extra people living in my house, plus the idea that they'll be out during the day. They've got 2 small kids. Where are they going to go? They're broke. It's not like they can afford to take the kids on daily outings. I shake my head and tell them I appreciate the offer, but I simply can't agree to it, and I apologize. That's when Jenny loses it. She starts going off about how I've always been tight with money and how I don't know what it means to truly live. She claims I've never taken any risks, that I'm just a boring person with a dull life, and that I'm probably envious of their adventurous lifestyle. Yeah, she really went there. At this point, I'm furious, but I try not to show it. I calmly reply, "Jenny, this isn't about jealousy or anything like that. It's about respecting boundaries. You two made the choice to sell your house and live this way, and that's fine. But now you're asking me to take responsibility for it, and that's not fair. She won't let it go. We wouldn't be asking if we had another option. You think we want to be begging for help? No, but this is what family does, Brian. We help each other when things get tough. I thought you'd understand that. By now, Alex is just sitting there, looking uncomfortable, not saying much, and staring at the floor while Jenny continues to go off about how I'm selfish and heartless. She's talking about how their travels have inspired them and how they don't want to settle for the regular suburban life. And all I can think is, yeah, but you need money for all of that, don't you? Finally, I say, look, I'm sorry, but my answer is still no. I can't let you stay here. It's just not going to work. They storm out, Jenny muttering something about figuring it out without my help. Honestly, I'm relieved. I didn't want to keep arguing, but I already know this isn't the end of it. And yeah, I was right, because after they left, things got worse than I expected. So, after Jenny and Alex stormed out, I thought that was it. Like maybe they'd calm down and realize they messed up. But I was wrong. A couple of days later, the real fallout began. I was at home, going about my usual routine, when I got a call from my mom. Normally, when she calls, it's just to check in or ask if I've been eating enough veggies. Seriously. But I could tell this call was different. She starts with, Brian, I need to talk to you about Jenny. And that's when I knew it was going to be a long conversation. Apparently, Jenny went straight to our parents after leaving my house. She told them this whole sob story about how I refused to help them when they were in a tough spot, and of course, she framed it so I looked like the villain. My mom's voice was full of disappointment, like I had just kicked a puppy. And she says, I don't understand why you wouldn't help your sister, Brian. They're in a tough spot, and family is supposed to help each other. I try to stay calm, but inside, I'm getting annoyed. I explain what really happened, that I offered to help them find a rental and even offered money to get them back on their feet. But they wanted to move in with me for 10 months. I tell her how their plan was ridiculous, how they blew through all their money without thinking, and now they're expecting me to bail them out. But of course, my mom doesn't see it that way. They made a mistake, Brian, but they're still family. You have the space. It wouldn't be forever, just long enough for them to get things together. Here's the thing, though. My mom has a way of making you feel guilty without meaning to. She's not mean, but she drops these little comments that make you feel like you're failing as a son or a brother. It's exhausting, but this time I wasn't having it. I told her straight up, Mom, I'm not doing it. I love Jenny, but she and Alex need to take responsibility for their choices. It's not my job to let them crash at my place because they didn't plan. She didn't like my response, but she dropped it for now. I thought that was the end of the conversation. But oh no, it was just getting started. The next day, my dad calls. Now, my dad is a different story. He's not the guilt trip type. He's more of the tough love kind. When he's mad, you hear about it. He gets straight to the point. No sugarcoating. Brian, he says, I hear you've been giving your sister a hard time. I try to explain again, but he cuts me off saying I'm being selfish and how I've always had it easy. Yeah, right, I think, like working my ass off for 10 years to pay off this house was easy. He goes on about how Jenny's always the one taking risks, living her life to the fullest, and I'm just sitting here comfortable, not doing anything exciting. He basically calls me a coward for not letting them stay, implying I'm a boring stick in the mud who doesn't understand what it means to really live. At this point, I'm really getting heated. I tell him, Dad, this isn't about being adventurous or not. It's about them making a poor decision and expecting me to clean it up. I worked hard for this house, and I'm not going to let them take advantage of it. But he's not hearing it. He goes on about how I'm in the position to help and how I'm failing as a brother by not stepping up. It feels like he's just repeating everything Jenny said, painting me as the bad guy in the whole situation. And honestly, it hurts. I've always been the responsible one in the family, the one who worked hard, kept my head down, and did what needed to be done, but now it feels like none of that matters. After the call, I'm furious. I feel like I'm being attacked from all sides. Both my parents are mad at me, and Jenny's probably telling everyone I'm heartless. And yep, that's exactly what happens. A few hours later, I get a message from one of our mutual friends, Tom. Tom's a good guy, but he's also friends with Jenny, so he's heard her side of things. He texts me, "Hey man, what's going on with you and Jenny?" She says you're not letting her family stay with you even though they're in trouble. I explain my side to him, how it's not that simple, how they're asking for too much, and how I've already offered other ways to help. Tom, being reasonable, listens. But then he hits me with, "Yeah, but it's just for a little while, right? So you could tough it out for 10 months. It's family, dude." And now I'm just done. It feels like everyone's forgotten I have a right to say no. Like, my house isn't even mine anymore, just a resource everyone thinks they can use. I'm frustrated because no matter how I explain it, everyone acts like it's no big deal for me to let a whole family move in and turn my life upside down for almost a year. The final blow comes when Jenny herself texts me. It's not a long message, but it hits hard. She just says, "I can't believe you've turned your back on us. We really needed you." And I sit there, staring at my phone, feeling torn. Part of me feels guilty. Like maybe I should have just given in to avoid all this drama. But another part of me is still standing firm. I know I'm not wrong. It's not my fault they made bad decisions. And it's not fair for them to dump their problems on me just because I have a house. Still, the guilt is eating away at me, and I start wondering if I could have handled things differently. Maybe I should have been softer, more understanding. But at the same time, I know that giving in would have just enabled them to keep making these reckless choices, thinking someone else will always fix things. So now I'm stuck. My parents are mad at me, Jenny's pissed, and even some friends are questioning whether I did the right thing. I'm just trying to hold on to the fact that I set a boundary for myself, even though it feels like the whole world is telling me I'm wrong for doing it. But this isn't over because as much as I want to walk away from all the drama, Jenny isn't done yet. So after all the phone calls and texts, I thought maybe things would blow over if I just ignored it for a while. Maybe Jenny and my parents would calm down, realize I'm not the bad guy here, and we could all move on. But no, things didn't settle down. They escalated even more. It starts with my mom, she's still trying to mediate, calling me every couple of days, saying, "Brian, you've got to help your sister. You don't know what it's like to be in her shoes. She's struggling and she has kids." It's the same thing over and over. Every time, I have to remind her that it's not that I don't want to help. It's just how much they're asking. It's not like they're about to be homeless on the street. I offered other help, but nothing I say seems to get through. Then one evening, I get a knock on my door. It's Jenny and Alex. No text, no call beforehand, just showing up like everything's normal. I open the door, and there they are, looking tired and desperate, with the kids holding onto Jenny's legs. I can tell right away this is going to be awkward. Jenny's holding some papers, and I already feel like I'm about to be dragged into something bigger than expected. Without wasting time, Jenny says, "Brian, we need you to reconsider. This is serious. We've looked everywhere, and there's nowhere affordable to stay. The rentals are too expensive, and we don't have the money to even put down a deposit." She waves the papers at me. Printouts of apartment listings, most of them crossed out in red ink. I glance at them for a moment, but I'm already thinking about how to respond. I'm not in the mood to argue, but it's clear they're not taking no for an answer. Before I can speak, Alex steps in, and this time, he's not the calm guy I've known before. He's frustrated, even angry. "We've tried everything, Brian. We're out of options. You've got this house all to yourself, and you're just sitting on it while we're struggling. You really can't let us stay for a little while." Now I'm getting irritated. I've already had this conversation too many times, and every time I say no, they just keep pushing. I say, "I've told you before, I'm not comfortable with having 4 extra people in my house for almost a year. I offered help in other ways, even money, but you're not listening. I can't let you move in. That's final." But Jenny isn't backing down. She steps closer, and now her voice is trembling like she's about to cry. "Brian, we have nowhere else to go. The kids are exhausted. We're exhausted. We're not asking for much, just a roof over our heads for a little while. We'll pay you back when we get back on our feet. Please, you're our last hope." I look at the kids, Emma and Lucas, and they're just standing there, looking confused. They probably don't even understand what's going on. And honestly, that makes me feel guilty. It's not their fault their parents made bad decisions. but I can't let that guilt make the decision for me. I know I'll regret it if I don't stand my ground. If I don't, this whole situation will turn my life upside down. So I take a deep breath and say, I'm sorry, but I can't. I understand it's hard, but this isn't the solution. You need to find another way. That's when Jenny loses it. In a second, her sadness turns to rage. You're unbelievable, she shouts, her voice echoing down the hallway. You're just sitting there, living comfortably, while your own family suffers. I can't believe how heartless you've become. You've changed, Brian. You're not the brother I grew up with. Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach, but I'm too furious to let them affect me. I fire back, I haven't changed. You're the one acting entitled, thinking you can just show up and expect me to bail you out because you didn't plan ahead. I didn't cause this mess. You did. And now you want me to fix it? That's not how it works. The argument keeps escalating from there. Alex jumps in, calling me the selfish one in the family, saying I've never been there for them when they needed me. He's bringing up stuff from years ago, random things that don't even matter anymore, like how I didn't lend him money for some business idea he had. It feels like they've been holding on to all this resentment, just waiting for the right moment to throw it in my face. At this point, we're all shouting over each other, and the kids are crying. It's a mess. I'm standing in my doorway being accused of being the worst brother ever, and all I can think is, how did it come to this? Finally, I say, enough. This is my house, and I've made my decision. I'm not changing my mind. I think you need to leave. Jenny looks at me like she can't believe what she's hearing. She opens her mouth to respond, but then just shakes her head, grabs the kids, and storms out. Alex follows behind her, glaring at me like I'm some kind of villain. As they walk away, I feel a strange mix of anger, guilt, and relief. I know I did the right thing by standing firm, but it still feels awful that it had to come to this. I watch them get in their car and drive off. And for a moment, I just stand there wondering what will happen next. I can't help but feel like this isn't over, that more drama is on the way. And sure enough, I was right. Later that night, my phone explodes with messages from family members. Jenny has gone full drama mode, telling everyone what happened, making it sound like I kicked them out onto the street with nowhere to go and I'm just sitting here laughing about it. My aunt, cousins, everyone is texting me asking, how could you do this to Jenny and the kids? You have a big house. They just need a place to stay. It's like they've all bought into this story that I'm some heartless villain hoarding my home while my sister suffers. No matter how many times I try to explain my side, no one listens. They just keep repeating, family helps family. By the end of the night, I'm drained. I've spent hours defending myself, but it feels like no one cares. Jenny's managed to turn everyone against me, and now I'm the bad guy in this whole situation. But here's the thing, I'm still not backing down. I'm not going to let them guilt me into doing something that will make my life miserable. I know I did the right thing, even if no one else sees it that way. I just have to figure out how to survive the fallout. After everything with the family and the messages flooding in from all directions, I'm ready to disconnect for a while. I just want to turn my phone off, lock the doors, and wait for the storm to pass. But of course, things aren't going to calm down. If anything, they're about to escalate to a whole new level. A couple of days go by without hearing directly from Jenny or Alex, which should have been a relief, but honestly, it felt like something big was brewing. You know that silence right before an argument breaks out? That's what it felt like. I could tell they weren't done with me yet. Sure enough, one morning, I wake up to find a huge post on Facebook from Jenny. It's public, so everyone can see it. She's going off about how some family members, obviously me, have abandoned her in her time of need. She says she and the kids are on the brink of homelessness, and that all they wanted was a little support from someone in a position of privilege. The post is filled with dramatic language, talking about how some family members are selfish and don't understand the importance of helping each other in tough times. The comment section is a complete mess. People are jumping in, saying how heartless it is to turn away family, asking how anyone could do that to their own sister. I'm reading all of this, and I can feel my blood boil. These people have no idea what's really going on. They're just swallowing whatever Jenny's telling them. And suddenly, I'm public enemy number one. What's worse, A bunch of extended family members are commenting too. My aunt, who I haven't spoken to in years, jumps in with, "I always knew Brian was selfish." Like that's some sort of well-known fact about me. My cousins are sharing the post, and suddenly my phone is blowing up with notifications from people telling me I need to step up and do the right thing. I try to calm down, but the more I scroll through the comments, the angrier I get. No matter how many times I explain my side, Jenny's twisted the story so much that now I look like the villain. And it's working. I'm losing this public battle. So I make a decision. I'm not usually the type to air dirty laundry online, but this has gone too far. If Jenny's going to drag me through the mud on Facebook, I'm going to set the record straight. I type out a long post explaining my side, how I offered to help them in other ways, how they're the ones who demanded to live rent-free for nearly a year, and how I simply can't accommodate them. I mention how they've been irresponsible with their money, how they're trying to guilt-trip me into giving up my house, and how this whole situation is their fault, not mine. I hit post and wait. The fireworks start immediately. People are commenting on my post, some agreeing with me, saying it's not my responsibility to take them in, while others back Jenny, saying I'm being too harsh and that families should stick together. It turns into a full-blown argument in the comments, with people defending either side. Jenny, of course, sees my post and flips out. She starts messaging me directly, calling me every name in the book: selfish, heartless, arrogant. She says I'm destroying the family and can't believe I'd embarrass her like this in front of everyone. The irony of her saying that after she went public first is just too much. I try to stay calm and respond. I tell her that I had no choice, that I had to defend myself after she attacked me on Facebook, but she's not hearing any of it. She's too caught up in her own narrative, convinced that she's the victim. Eventually, she blocks me on Facebook like we're teenagers, which honestly suits me just fine. Less drama for me. But just when I think things might finally die down, I get a call from my dad. Here we go again, right? He's not yelling, but his voice is low and serious, which is, in some ways, worse. He's disappointed. He says he saw everything on Facebook and is upset that I made it public. He's mad that I didn't handle it privately, and now the whole family is divided. I can tell he's blaming me for making things worse. I try to explain that I was backed into a corner, that Jenny started it by attacking me first, but no matter what I say, he's not happy. He starts talking about how I need to make things right. That family is the most important thing, and that it's not too late to offer Jenny and Alex a place to stay. He says that if I do that, maybe things can go back to normal. That's when I finally snap. I tell him, "Dad, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to let them live with me, and I'm done apologizing for it. I've done nothing wrong. They made their choices, and now they have to deal with the consequences. I'm not their safety net, and it's not my job to fix their problems." He goes quiet for a moment, clearly shocked. I don't usually stand up to him like this, but I'm done. I won't let them guilt me into doing something I don't want to do just to keep the peace. Finally, he sighs and says, "I hope you know what you're doing, Brian," then hangs up. After that, things go quiet. Jenny's still blocked me on social media, and my parents aren't really talking to me. It feels like the whole family is in a tense standoff, waiting for someone to make the next move. But here's the thing. I'm not making the next move. I've done my part. I stood my ground, and I'm not backing down. It sucks that things turned out this way. I never wanted to fight with my family, but I know I did the right thing. I set a boundary, and I stuck to it, even when it felt like everyone was against me. Maybe the family dynamic is messed up now, and maybe things won't go back to how they were. But honestly, I'm okay with that. At least I know I'm living on my own terms in my own house, without anyone trying to guilt me into giving it up. And for me, that's worth all the drama in the world. This story is called, "After 12 years of running the family business, my parents kicked me out and made my 22-year-old nephew the CEO because he's smart like his mother. Now, after he destroyed the company, they're begging for my help." Hey everyone, we put so much effort into finding these stories for you. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button. It means a lot and helps keep this journey going strong. Let's grow together, and now let's begin the video. The original poster starts by saying, "Hey Reddit, I've always considered myself a guy who has his life together, but lately, I'm questioning everything." Let me set the scene. This all started at my dad's 62nd birthday party, and I swear it felt like my life flipped upside down in an instant. For context, I've been working in my dad's company for the last 12 years. 12 years of dedication, hard work, and building the business. I thought I was secure, that I'd inherit the company one day, just like any loyal family member might expect after putting in the effort. It was a pretty big party. Honestly, we had friends, family, business associates, everyone. My mom and dad love a good celebration, and this one was no different. Drinks were flowing, the food was amazing, and everyone seemed to be having a good time. Then came the moment when my dad stood up to give a toast. I expected the usual, a couple of jokes, a heartfelt thank you, and maybe a little talk about how much he was looking forward to retiring, but then he hit us with that announcement. He said, "I'm happy to announce that after much thought, I'm ready to retire in a few months and I've decided to pass the CEO position to someone I believe can take the company to new heights." My grandson, Mike. I froze. I thought maybe I misheard him. Grandson Mike? The kid's 22, just graduated from business school, no real experience, and yet somehow he's the one taking over the company I've dedicated over a decade of my life to? The applause and congratulations around the room felt like daggers. My heart was racing, and my stomach felt like it was going to fall out of my body. I tried to keep my composure, but inside I was furious. Don't get me wrong, I didn't hate Mike. He's a decent enough kid when you're chatting with him at family get-togethers, but he's young and inexperienced. He doesn't know the first thing about running a company. And I can say that with certainty because I've been doing it for years. All Mike has is a shiny degree and my parents' misplaced confidence. Meanwhile, I've spent years building relationships with clients, managing the team, and handling daily operations. But apparently that didn't count for much. After the toast, everyone went back to mingling. But I couldn't process what had just happened. My wife came over to check on me, and I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost because she immediately asked what was wrong. I just shook my head and told her we'd talk about it later. I needed time to figure out what I was going to do. Later that night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, I confronted my dad privately. I thought maybe he'd explain that it was just a formality or that I'd still be heavily involved, something to justify this decision. But no, he stood firm. He told me he believed Mike was the right choice because he was young, full of fresh ideas, and had a degree. A degree. Meanwhile, I had been the one actually building relationships with clients, managing the team, and handling daily operations for over a decade. He even had the nerve to say, "You can still work with him, mentor him, show him the ropes." That was the breaking point for me. I told him right then and there that I couldn't stay. There was no way I'd work under Mike after everything I'd done for the company. It wasn't even about the money or the title at that point. It was about principle. I'd earned that position, I deserved it, and being told I wasn't even considered felt like a slap in the face. The next couple of days were a blur. My parents tried to convince me not to quit, saying I was being dramatic and that I needed to think about the family. But I couldn't see it any other way. If they didn't value my work enough to give me the role I'd worked towards, then I didn't see the point in staying. So I handed in my resignation, packed up my office, and walked away. Leaving that office for the last time was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I'd spent so many years there. I knew every inch of that place, the good parts and the bad. It wasn't just a job to me. It was a part of my life. Walking away felt like cutting off a limb, but I knew I had to. Staying would have been even worse. My wife was incredibly supportive throughout this. She told me she respected my decision and that she was proud of me for standing up for myself. She saw how much this hurt me, but she also knew I couldn't stay in a situation where I wasn't respected. That support meant the world to me because honestly, it felt like the rest of my family was against me. My mom kept calling, begging me to reconsider. My dad even showed up at my house unannounced one day, trying to convince me to come back. But every time they asked, my answer was the same. No. The hardest part of all this was the sense of betrayal. My dad and I used to be close, especially when we first started the company. I gave up my own career to help him build his dream, and now it felt like he was throwing me away for what? Some idea that Mike was the future just because he had a degree? It didn't make sense. After I left, I didn't hear from Mike directly. I don't even know if he wanted the position or if he just went along with it because my parents insisted. Either way, it didn't matter. The damage was done. My parents had made their choice, and now I had to make mine. The first few weeks after quitting were tough. I kept replaying the conversation with my dad in my head, wondering if there was something I could have said or done differently. But every time I came to the same conclusion, I made the right call. There was no way I could have stayed and watched Mike fumble his way through running the company while I stood on the sidelines, biting my tongue. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my future. So here I am, 6 months later, still trying to piece my life back together. I've been keeping my distance from my family, focusing on figuring out my next steps. And as much as it pains me to say this, I think walking away was the best decision I could have made. If they couldn't see my worth, then I had no reason to stick around. After I quit, I thought I'd be done with the family business for good. I didn't want to think about it, hear about it, or even be reminded it existed. But life doesn't work that way, especially when the thing you're trying to forget is tied to your family. Despite my best efforts, news about the company and Mike's disastrous leadership kept finding its way to me. At first, it was small things. A friend of mine who still worked there texted me saying, "Dude, Mike just fired 3 senior employees because they didn't fit his vision." My first reaction was to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. Mike had no clue what he was doing. Those employees had been with us since the early days and knew the business inside and out. Losing them was like cutting off an arm and expecting to run a marathon. Next, I heard he was making bold changes to our contracts. I'm all for innovation, but Mike was messing with deals that had been in place for years. Relationships I'd carefully built and nurtured were falling apart. Clients started walking away, frustrated and confused. And still, my parents stuck by him. "He's just adjusting," my mom told a mutual friend. "It's all part of the process." Sure, the process of destroying the company. Then came the real kicker: financial fraud. I don't know all the details because honestly, I didn't care to dig into it. But from what I gathered, Mike tried to inflate our numbers to impress a big client. Rookie mistake. He probably thought he was being clever, but all he did was raise a giant red flag that screamed, "Audit me." The fallout was immediate and brutal. The company's reputation was shredded, clients bailed en masse, and lawsuits started piling up. Hearing about all this felt like watching a train wreck in slow motion. On one hand, I felt vindicated. I'd warned my parents that Mike wasn't ready for the job, but they didn't listen. On the other hand, it was painful to see something I'd worked so hard to build crumble so quickly. I didn't want to care, but I couldn't help it. That company had been my life for 12 years. It was like watching someone take a sledgehammer to a house you built with your own 2 hands. But here's the thing, none of this surprised me. Mike was never prepared to lead. He grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth, never had to struggle for anything, and had this arrogance like he thought he could just walk into a room and figure it out as he went. That might work in school, but not in the real world. Business isn't forgiving. It doesn't care about your last name or your GPA. Mike was learning that the hard way. I wasn't the only one who saw it coming. I started getting calls and texts from former coworkers, people I hadn't spoken to in months. "Man, we miss you around here," one guy said. "It's a mess without you." Another told me, "The place feels like a sinking ship. I don't know how much longer I can stick around." It was flattering, sure, but also bittersweet. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, people who'd trusted me and supported me. Hearing them struggle made me wish I could help. But I knew better than to get involved. I wasn't about to swoop in and clean up Mike's mess. That wasn't my job anymore. What really got to me, though, was how my parents handled everything. Instead of holding Mike accountable, they made excuses for him. "He's under a lot of pressure," my mom said when someone asked about the fraud charges. "He just needs time to find his footing." Time? The guy had managed to nearly destroy the company in less than 6 months. How much more time did he need? And let's not forget my sister. She was Mike's biggest supporter throughout all of this, acting like he was some kind of misunderstood genius. I don't know if she was genuinely delusional or just too proud to admit she'd made a mistake, but either way, it was infuriating. She pushed for Mike to get the CEO role, convinced my parents it was the right decision, and now she was doubling down on her bad choice. I stayed out of it for the most part, but one day I couldn't resist. I bumped into an old family friend at the grocery store, and they casually mentioned how thrilling it must be to see the next generation taking over the business. I smiled and said, "Exciting isn't the word I'd use." They laughed, but I wasn't joking. In an odd way, watching the company collapse was strangely satisfying. It felt like all the frustration and anger I had when they overlooked me for Mike was finally being justified. I wasn't crazy or overreacting. They'd made a huge mistake, and now they were facing the consequences. But I didn't take pleasure in their downfall. I'd moved on, or at least I was trying to. I started thinking about ideas for my own business, something I could build from scratch without anyone else getting in the way. My wife was incredibly supportive, encouraging me to take the leap and do something for myself. It was scary, but also thrilling. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my own future. Meanwhile, my parents were scrambling. Through mutual connections, I heard they were trying to manage the damage and regain trust with clients. Good luck with that. Once trust is gone, it's almost impossible to get it back, especially in the business world. With lawsuits piling up, they had bigger issues to tackle. As for Mike, I had no clue how he was managing things. I hadn't spoken to him since I left, and honestly, I didn't care to. But from what I gathered, he was struggling. Some people said he was still pretending to have it all under control, while others claimed he was on the brink of a breakdown. Either way, it wasn't my problem. 6 months later, the company was a mere shadow of its former self. Clients were gone, employees were quitting left and right, and my parents were desperate. They hadn't reached out to me yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. And when they did, I already knew exactly what I was going to say. 6 months after I walked out of the family business, the inevitable happened. I'd been preparing myself for it, but still, a mix of emotions hit me when I saw my parents standing on my doorstep. They looked older, more stressed than I had ever seen them. My dad had this awkward stiffness, like he didn't want to be there, but knew he had no choice. My mom, however, her expression said it all: desperation. I didn't invite them in right away. Honestly, I was tempted to shut the door in their faces, but I didn't. "Can we come in?" my dad asked, his voice hesitant. I stepped aside without a word, and they shuffled in. The tension in the room was immediate. My wife, who had been in the kitchen, gave me a look, but didn't say anything. She knew this moment was coming too. She quietly went upstairs, leaving me to handle it. I sat across from them, arms crossed, waiting for them to speak. My mom jumped in first. She always did. "We need your help," she said, her voice shaking. "The business is—" She hesitated, like saying it aloud would make things worse. "It's in trouble. Mike made some mistakes. Big ones." I didn't answer, just stared at her, letting the silence hang. It was obvious she wanted me to fill the silence, to jump in with a solution. I didn't. Eventually, my dad spoke. "He's in over his head," he admitted, rubbing his temple like he had a headache. "Now, the company is facing lawsuits, losing clients. We're barely hanging on." This was the moment I'd envisioned many times since I left. I had imagined them coming to me, asking me to fix things, and me laughing in their faces. But now that it was actually happening, I felt more frustrated than anything. It wasn't satisfying or validating. It was just sad. "And what do you expect me to do about it?" I finally asked. My tone wasn't angry, but it wasn't kind either. I wanted them to feel uncomfortable. They deserved it. My mom reached out, putting her hand on mine. "You know the business better than anyone," she said. "We need you to come back. Please." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For years, all I wanted was for them to recognize my worth, to admit that I was the one keeping the company going. And now, here they were, practically begging me to save them. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an insult. After everything, they still expected me to fix their mess. "Why don't you ask Mike?" I said, pulling my hand away. "He's the CEO, right? Let him fix it. Mike can't handle it, my dad said, frustration creeping into his voice. We made a mistake. We see that now, but this is bigger than him. It's about the company, about everything we've built. Everything I've built, I corrected. I'm the one who spent 12 years making that company what it is, and you tossed me aside like I was nothing. My dad sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. He looked tired, defeated. We thought we were doing the right thing, he said. We thought Mike would bring something new, but you were right. He wasn't ready, and now we're paying the price. Hearing him admit that should have felt good, but it didn't. It just made me angrier. They had known Mike wasn't ready. I had told them over and over, but they hadn't listened. Now, they wanted me to clean up the mess. I'm sorry, my mom said softly, tears filling her eyes. We were wrong. We should have trusted you. But it's not too late. You can still fix this. I stood up, pacing the room. You want me to fix it? I said, my voice rising. You think I can just walk back in and make everything better? Do you even hear yourselves? You didn't trust me before, but now that you're desperate, I'm suddenly good enough? They didn't respond, and the silence only fueled my anger. Do you even understand what you're asking? You want me to put my life on hold again? To bail you out of a situation you created? And for what? So you can pat me on the back and say, good job, kid, before throwing me under the bus again? That's not what this is, my dad said firmly. This is about saving the company, saving our legacy. Your legacy, I shot back. Not mine, not anymore. My mom started crying, full on sobbing into her hands. My dad just sat there staring at the floor like he didn't know what to do. For a moment, I felt bad. They were my parents, after all. But then I remembered the humiliation, the betrayal, the countless nights I spent working late while they praised Mike for his good grades. That angered me more than their tears could ever soften. I can't help you, I said finally, my voice steady. I won't. I've already started working on my own plans. I'm building something for myself now, and I'm not going to throw that away to clean up your mess. My dad looked up, his face hardening. So that's it? You're just going to turn your back on your family? I laughed, a bitter sound. You turned your back on me first? Don't try to guilt me into this. It won't work. They left soon after that, my mom still sniffling. And my dad looking like he wanted to argue but didn't have the strength. As soon as the door closed behind them, I let out a shaky breath. My wife came downstairs and wrapped her arms around me. You did the right thing, she said. You don't owe them anything. She was right, of course. I knew that, but it still hurt. Walking away from the company had been tough enough. Walking away from my parents felt even harder. But I couldn't go back, not now, not ever. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what they'd said, about saving the company, about fixing things. A part of me wanted to, not for them, but for myself, for the people who'd worked with me, for the clients who'd trusted me. But another part of me knew it wasn't my responsibility anymore. They made their choice, and now they had to deal with the consequences. I fell asleep that night more certain than ever. I wasn't going back. It was time to move forward. After my parents showed up at my door, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in months, I stopped looking back. I'd spent so much time dwelling on what happened, reliving the betrayal, the disappointment, the anger. But after slamming that door on them, figuratively and literally, I realized it was time to focus on what lay ahead. If I wasn't going back to their company, I had to build something of my own. Starting from scratch was daunting, even when you knew what you were doing. I didn't have a big office or a fancy team. Hell, I didn't even have a solid plan at first. All I had were the skills and knowledge I'd accumulated over 12 years, and the determination to prove to myself, and maybe a little to them, that I could do this. The first step was deciding what kind of business I wanted to create. Real estate was all I knew, so that part was easy. But I didn't just want to recreate my dad's company. I wanted to do something different, something better. I'd learned a lot over the years, not just about the market, but about how to treat people. My parents had always treated the business like a machine, churning out deals without much regard for the people behind them. I wanted to build something more personal, more human. I started by reaching out to a few of my old clients. These were people I had worked with for years, people who trusted me. I explained that I was starting my own thing and asked if they'd be interested in working with me again. To my surprise and relief, most of them were enthusiastic. "We were wondering when you'd get back in the game," one of them said. "Mike's been a disaster. We've been waiting for someone to step up." Their responses gave me the boost of confidence I needed. If they believed in me, maybe I could pull this off after all. But getting clients on board was just one piece of the puzzle. I also needed a team. The company wasn't going to run itself. That's where my old coworkers came in. I'd stayed in touch with a few of them after I left, and I knew some were unhappy with how things had been going under Mike's leadership. One by one, I started making calls. "Hey, I'm putting something together," I told them. "It's small right now, but I think it has potential. Are you interested?" The responses were overwhelmingly positive. Many of them had already left my dad's company, tired of the chaos and mismanagement. They were between jobs, looking for something new. "I'm in," one of them said immediately. "I've been waiting for this call." Within a couple of weeks, I had a small but solid team. We didn't have a fancy office or shiny equipment, just a shared workspace and a lot of enthusiasm. It felt like the early days of my dad's company when we were scrappy and hungry. Except this time, it was my vision, my rules. Setting up the business was a whirlwind. Between registering the company, building a website, and figuring out how to market ourselves, I barely had time to breathe. But it was exhilarating. Every small win, getting a client to sign on, turning a lead into a deal, felt like a massive accomplishment. For the first time in years, I wasn't just working. I was creating something, and it felt incredible. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments of doubt, times when I questioned whether I was taking on more than I could handle. The pressure of managing everything, finances, logistics, client relationships, was sometimes too much. But every time I thought about giving up, I reminded myself of my reasons. This wasn't just about building a business, it was about proving to myself that I could do it. One of the toughest challenges was finding a balance between work and personal life. My wife was incredibly supportive, but I knew it wasn't easy for her. She worked full-time while I focused all my energy on the business, often working late into the night. "You're going to burn out if you keep this up," she warned me one night as I sat hunched over my laptop reviewing contracts. "I know," I said, rubbing my temples, "but if I don't push now, it'll never take off." She didn't argue, but I could see the concern in her eyes. It reminded me that while the business was important, so was the life we had together. I made a mental note to find a better balance, though I wasn't sure how, at least not yet. As the weeks went by, things began to fall into place. Our first few deals closed smoothly, and the feedback from clients was overwhelmingly positive. "This feels like the old days," one of them said, "when things were simpler, more personal." Hearing that felt like validation. I was doing something right. The business started to grow. It wasn't rapid growth, but steady. And that was enough for me. Meanwhile, I couldn't ignore the rumors about my dad's company. Word on the street was that things were getting worse. They were losing clients fast, and lawsuits were piling up. It was hard not to feel a bit satisfied. After all, I had warned them. But mostly, I felt sorry for the employees and clients caught in the middle. They deserved better. What really surprised me, though, was how many of those clients and employees started reaching out to me. It wasn't something I had pursued, at least not at first, but word spread that I was starting my own business and people began contacting me. "If you're looking for more staff, let me know," one former coworker said. "I can't stand it here anymore." Another client emailed me, "We've always trusted you. Let's talk." I wasn't poaching anyone. These people were coming to me, and honestly, it felt good. These were individuals who recognized my value and wanted to work with me because of what I brought to the table. It was a stark contrast to how my family had treated me. By the end of the second month, we had outgrown our shared workspace and began looking for a proper office. It was a small milestone, but it felt huge. Standing in that empty space, imagining the possibilities, I couldn't help but smile. This was mine. No one could take it away from me. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. As I settled into the routine of running my new business, things with my family escalated. Word had spread about what I was doing, clients switching to me, employees reaching out to join my team. And it didn't take long for the news to reach my parents and sister. I hadn't spoken to any of them since their visit to my house, and I wasn't planning to, but they clearly weren't done with me. It started with emails. My dad sent several, all variations of the same message, wanting to talk and work things out. I ignored them. Then my mom started calling, first once a week, then every few days. I never answered. Eventually, she left a voicemail that made my blood boil. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice trembling with barely concealed anger. "You're tearing this family apart. I don't know how you can live with yourself." I deleted the message without replying. What was there to say? They'd made their choices, and now they had to deal with them. I wasn't responsible for their mess, no matter how much they tried to blame me. But things really came to a head when my sister got involved. Unlike my parents, who were still trying to guilt me into returning, she went straight for the jugular. One day, out of nowhere, I received a letter from a lawyer. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but as I read through it, my stomach sank. They were accusing me of stealing clients and employees. According to the letter, I had intentionally sabotaged their business by poaching key accounts and personnel. They claimed I was violating some unwritten family agreement and demanded I cease all operations immediately. If I didn't, they threatened to take legal action. I couldn't help but laugh as I read it. It was so ridiculous, so petty. There was no non-compete clause in my contract when I worked for them. I had checked twice. They had no legal ground to stand on. But the fact they'd resorted to this tactic told me everything I needed to know about how desperate they were. Instead of responding directly, I forwarded the letter to my lawyer. "Handle it," I told him. "I don't have time for this nonsense." He assured me it was an empty threat and not to worry. Still, the whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth. A few days later, my parents showed up at my office unannounced. It was the first time they'd seen the new space, and I could tell they weren't happy about it. My mom looked around with barely concealed disdain, while my dad's expression was a mix of anger and defeat. "Do you really think this is going to work?" my dad asked, gesturing at the office. "You're playing a dangerous game." I leaned back in my chair, unfazed. "It's already working," I said simply, "and it's not a game." My mom's face flushed with anger. "You're ruining everything," she snapped. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family? To us?" I stood up, keeping my voice calm but firm. "What I'm doing," I said, "is building something for myself. Something you didn't think I was capable of. If that bothers you, that's your problem, not mine." They didn't stay long after that. I think they realized there was no point in trying to guilt me anymore, but their visit left me shaken. Not because of what they said, but because it confirmed something I'd suspected for a while. They weren't just upset about losing the business. They were upset about losing control over me. For years, I had been the dependable one, the one they could count on to keep things running smoothly. I'd sacrificed so much of my own life to help build their dream, and now that I was gone, they didn't know what to do. It wasn't about the clients or the money. It was about the power dynamic, and they hated that I had taken it back. Meanwhile, things at my dad's company were deteriorating. Employees were quitting in large numbers, and their reputation was in tatters. Mike, I heard, was barely showing up to work anymore. Someone told me he'd been spotted at a bar in the middle of the day, looking completely out of it. I didn't feel sorry for him, but I couldn't help but think how all of this might have been avoided if my parents had made different choices. The lawsuits were still ongoing, and from what little I knew, their legal team was struggling to keep up. I didn't envy them. Trying to clean up Mike's mess was like trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose. It was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. Through it all, I stayed focused on my own business. We were growing steadily, bringing in new clients, and expanding our team. I hired a small marketing firm to help spread the word, and it paid off almost immediately. Inquiries started pouring in, and for the first time in a long time, I felt optimistic about the future. One night, as I was reviewing our financials, my wife came into the room with a glass of ginger tea. "You know," she said, sitting down next to me, "I don't think I've ever seen you this happy." I smiled, setting the papers aside. "It feels good," I admitted, "building something for myself, not answering to anyone else." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You deserve it," she said. and her words stayed with me long after she went to bed. For so long, I had been chasing someone else's approval. My parents, my family, even Mike, in a way. But now, I was finally doing something for myself. And for the first time, I didn't care what anyone else thought. As I sat there, surrounded by the evidence of my hard work, I realized something important. This wasn't just about proving my parents wrong or outshining Mike. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of more, that I didn't need their validation to succeed. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. Let them send their letters, let them make their threats. I wasn't going back. Not now, not ever. Months after my parents' unannounced visit to my office and my sister's laughable legal threats, I found myself in a place I hadn't expected. Contentment. My new business was running well, not perfectly, of course, but enough to keep me busy and optimistic. My wife had even started talking about scaling down her own job to join me full-time, and the thought of building this together made it all feel even more meaningful. Still, the remnants of my old life lingered in the background. My parents weren't the type to just let things go, and though I had blocked most of their attempts to contact me, every now and then word about the family business or Mike would filter through mutual acquaintances. The news was rarely good. Mike, it seemed, had finally cracked under the pressure. The lawsuits had drained the company financially, and the loss of key clients meant their revenue was practically non-existent. My dad was forced to liquidate some assets to keep the doors open, but even that wasn't enough. A couple of former coworkers who had joined me recently mentioned that the office was practically a ghost town. Employees who stayed were doing so out of desperation, not loyalty. One day, I got a call from an old client who had stuck with my dad's company longer than most. "Your parents sold the building," he said. "I thought you'd want to know." That caught me off guard. Selling the office, that building had been the company's home since day one. It was more than just a workspace. It was a symbol of everything we had built together. Hearing that it was gone felt strange, like another piece of the past had crumbled away. "Thanks for letting me know," I told him, "but I'm not involved with them anymore." "I figured as much," he said. "Just thought you'd want to hear it from someone who's still rooting for you." I appreciated that. It reminded me that not everyone had turned their back on me during this mess. A few weeks later, I got another surprise. This time, it wasn't a phone call or a letter, it was an email from my dad. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. The subject line read, "An apology." I opened it, skimming the first few lines expecting more excuses or pleas for help. But as I read further, I realized this was different. He wasn't asking me to come back or trying to shift the blame. He was admitting he'd made a mistake. "I thought I was doing what was best for the family," he wrote. "But I see now that I let my pride get in the way. I listened to your sister because I didn't want to admit I was wrong about Mike. I see now that you were the one who deserved that position, and I'm sorry for not recognizing it sooner." The email went on for several paragraphs, recounting moments from the past that I had long since buried. He talked about how much he had relied on me during the early years, how he knew the company wouldn't have survived without my contributions. Reading it felt surreal. Part of me had waited years to hear these words, but now that they were here, I didn't know how to feel. Toward the end, he mentioned something that stuck with me. "I know I can't fix what's happened," he wrote, "but I hope someday you'll find it in your heart to forgive me." I closed the email without replying. Forgiveness was complicated. I wasn't angry anymore, not really, but I wasn't ready to let them back into my life either. It felt like they were still trying to pull me into the past, and I'd worked too hard to leave that behind. Meanwhile, my business continued to grow. We moved into a larger office and brought on a few more employees. Some of the clients who had stayed loyal to my dad's company eventually reached out, asking if they could work with me instead. I was hesitant at first, but after a few conversations, I realized they weren't just looking for a deal. They were looking for stability. I gave them that, and in return, they gave me their trust. As for Mike, the last I heard, he was living with my sister again. The lawsuits had been settled, but the financial damage was done. He was reportedly trying to find himself, though what that actually meant was anyone's guess. I didn't wish him ill, but I also didn't feel sorry for him. He had been given an opportunity he wasn't ready for, and he squandered it. That wasn't my problem. my sister predictably wasn't handling the fallout well. From what little I heard through mutual acquaintances, she was bitter and angry, blaming everyone but herself for how things turned out. My parents had stopped defending her publicly, which told me everything I needed to know. They were finally seeing her for who she really was. Not the brilliant daughter they had always believed in, but someone who was good at looking out for herself and no one else. One day, while sitting in my office, looking out at the city skyline, I realized something. I felt free, truly free. The weight of my family's expectations, their disappointment, their manipulation, it was all gone. For so long, I had defined myself by what they thought of me, by what I could do to earn their approval. But now, none of that mattered. I wasn't building my business to prove a point or to spite them. I was doing it for myself, for my wife, and for the people who believed in me. And that was enough. I don't know if I'll ever fully reconcile with my family. Maybe someday when the dust settles, we'll find a way to mend the broken pieces, or maybe we won't. Either way, I'm okay with it. For now, I'm focused on the future. And for the first time in years, it feels like mine.